Death of a lifestyle influencer, Ashlee Robinson, better known online as Ashlee Jenae. Just days after popping the question overseas, her fiancé is now being held in Zanzibar by investigators trying to figure out what happened. CBS Weekend News anchor Jerika Duncan spoke with the family and has new details. Jerika.
Yeah, good evening, Tony. Ashlee Robinson was on the vacation of a lifetime. She was in Zanzibar, which is off the coast of Tanzania. She was there celebrating her 31st birthday. Her boyfriend of about a year and a half, Joe McCann, proposed to her on the trip, but last week something went terribly wrong. Police say Robinson was found unconscious in her villa and was rushed to the hospital where she later died. Now, her parents tell me they received a call from McCann, the boyfriend, acknowledging that something had happened, but they say it was the resort where Robinson was staying that notified the family of their daughter's death.
Do you believe that Joe McCann had something to do with your daughter's death?
It's under investigation, and we don't know what went on.
It's under investigation, and like we said, we just want transparency.
Today, investigators in Tanzania held a news conference where they said they are questioning McCann and they are holding his passport until the autopsy results are complete. And Tony, we did reach out to McCann and have not heard back.
Jerika Duncan, Jerika, thank you very much.
The death of a lifestyle influencer overseas. Her fiancé detained by investigators. A luxury resort in Zanzibar. A ruling of suicide that a family refuses to accept, and evidence that suggests this investigation is only beginning to ask the right questions. This is the story of Ashlee Robinson, known to over 100,000 followers as Ashlee Jenae, a woman who built a platform celebrating intentional living, who traveled the world documenting what she called the soft life, who posted a photo on her 31st birthday feeding a giraffe with the caption, Chapter 31, "And I'm exactly where I need to be." 3 days later, she was found unconscious in a closet at the Zuri Zanzibar resort. By the time she reached the hospital, she would not survive. Tanzanian police called it suicide. Her family called it impossible, and the evidence, when you follow it closely, calls it something else entirely. Ashlee Robinson was not a stalled career. She was not a woman whose platform had peaked. She was ascending. Her Instagram presence had crossed the 100,000 follower mark. Her TikTok content was growing steadily. The brand she built was specific, intentional, and resonant. She spoke directly to black women seeking alternatives to hustle culture, to grind mentality, to the pressure of constant productivity. She called it the soft life. She called it divesting. She called it choosing yourself on purpose. That wasn't marketing language. That was the thesis of her public voice. Years of writing, photographing, curating experiences that modeled what it looked like to prioritize joy, rest, travel, and self-determination. Her audience didn't just follow her. They saw themselves in her trajectory. A woman who had decided that her life would be defined by her choices, not by external expectations. In early April 2026, Ashlee was living that thesis in real time. She was in Tanzania celebrating her birthday. Not just any trip, a luxury safari experience. Zuri Zanzibar Resort on Unguja Island, Seville Wildlife Lodge, where she fed a giraffe and posed for a photograph that would become one of the last images her followers would see her post. The caption was not performative. Chapter 31. And I'm exactly where I need to be. She was not alone. She was traveling with her boyfriend of approximately 1.5 years, Joseph McCann. On that same trip, McCann proposed. The engagement happened at Seville Wildlife Lodge. A lion in the background. A romantic moment in a place designed for once-in-a-lifetime memories. From the outside, it looked like the culmination of everything Ashlee had been building. A partnership, a proposal, a celebration of a life intentionally chosen. But something went wrong. Terribly. Irreversibly wrong. On April 8th, Ashlee called her mother, Yolanda Denise Andres. The conversation, later reported by CBS News, ABC Philadelphia, and TMZ, was not celebratory. Ashlee told her mother that she and Joe had argued. She told her that hotel staff had intervened. She told her that they had been separated into different rooms. Hotel staff had physically moved Joe McCann to a different villa, 8 to 10 minutes walking distance from Ashlee's room. That separation was not a casual decision. It was a response to a conflict serious enough that other hotel guests reported it. Not Ashlee, not Joe. Strangers staying at a luxury resort felt compelled to notify staff about a dispute they could hear or see. That tells you something about the intensity. That tells you something about the visibility. Zuri Zanzibar is not a budget property. It is a high-end resort with discreet villas, private walkways, professional staff trained to handle conflicts quietly. For other guests to report the argument means it breached the threshold of what people on vacation are willing to ignore. Hotel staff responded. They separated the couple. Joe was moved. Ashlee remained in her villa. And then what? Between the night of April 8th and the early hours of April 9th, a window opened. A window that has not been fully explained. A window that standard operating procedure at a property of Zuri Zanzibar's class should have closed with a welfare check. When staff judge a conflict serious enough to physically separate two parties, the next step is a logged visit to the person left alone, a timestamp, a staff member's identification, a documented confirmation that the individual is safe. The resort has not publicly confirmed whether that welfare check occurred. The Tanzanian police have not released a timeline showing staff visits to Ashlee's villa during those hours. That silence is not neutral. It is a gap in the record that should not exist at a property where every door entry is logged by keycard, where every common area is under camera surveillance, where every staff member carries a radio, and every movement is supposed to be traceable. Somewhere in that window, 2 to 3 hours after the separation, Ashlee Robinson was found unconscious. She was in the closet of her villa. She was still breathing. She was rushed to the hospital, but she would not recover. On April 9th, Joe McCann called Yolanda Andres. He told her that Ashlee had done something to herself. He told her that Ashlee was stable. He did not tell her immediately what had happened. When Yolanda asked him when the incident had occurred, Joe told her it had happened 11 hours earlier. 11 hours. A woman in critical condition at a hospital in Zanzibar, her mother in New Jersey. And between the moment hospital staff logged Ashlee's arrival and the moment her mother heard about it, almost half a day passed without a phone call. The family did not learn that Ashlee had died from Joe McCann. They learned it from the resort. The front desk of the Zuri Zanzibar resort notified the family that their daughter was gone. That sequence, reported by multiple news outlets, including CBS and NBC, is not a minor procedural detail. It is a foundational question. What was Joe McCann doing for 11 hours while Ashlee's mother had no idea her daughter was dying? No public statement from McCann has answered that question. No interview, no explanation on the Tanzanian record. The silence is not evidence of guilt, but it is evidence of absence. The absence of an account that makes sense of the timeline. By April 14th, Tanzanian authorities had issued their ruling. North Unguja Regional Police Commander Benedict Mapujira announced that Ashlee Robinson's death was a suicide. The method, according to the police statement, was hanging. The ruling was based primarily on the account provided by Joseph McCann. He had been on the property. He had been the person closest to her. He had told hospital staff what he said happened. And in the first public statements, Tanzanian police repeated that account back to the world as fact. Ashlee's family rejected the ruling immediately, not with accusations, not with conspiracy theories, with a single clear statement. We want transparency. Ashlee's sister, Alyssa Andres, spoke to NBC News national correspondent George Solis on April 14th. She told him that she had spoken to her sister the day before she died. Everything, Alyssa said, was completely normal. They had discussed what Ashlee planned to do when she returned to the United States. Alyssa's exact words, delivered on camera, she was so ready to take the next steps with who she thought was the love of her life. She was so happy with the choices she had made and the places she was in. She was happy. A sister is not a forensic expert. A phone call is not an autopsy. But Alyssa's testimony is a data point that an investigation should account for. A woman describing future plans, expressing happiness, celebrating the next chapter of her life, and then 72 hours later, according to the official record, taking her own life in a closet with no warning and no note. The ruling requires the public to accept that reversal. It requires the audience that followed Ashlee for years, that watched her build a brand around choosing joy, to believe that the woman who captioned a birthday photo, exactly where I need to be, was simultaneously planning her own death. That is not impossible. Mental health crises do not announce themselves. Despair does not always leave breadcrumbs. But the ruling does not just ask the public to accept the possibility of suicide. It asks them to accept it without corroboration, without a timeline that makes sense, without answers to the procedural questions that any competent investigation would address. And by the second week, something changed. Reporting began to emerge that Tanzanian investigators were no longer relying solely on Joe McCann's account. They had started pulling keycard entry and exit logs from the Zuri Zanzibar resort. They were reviewing which villa doors had opened, which had closed, which cards had been used, and during which exact minutes between April 8th and April 9th. That is not how a closed suicide case operates. You do not pull server logs from a luxury resort to prove that a person took their own life. You pull server logs to prove who was in the room when a person stopped being alive. The moment those logs became part of this case, the investigation stopped being about what Joe McCann said happened. It became about what the building could independently show happened. A suicide does not require keycard forensics. A homicide does, or at the very least, a death under circumstances that cannot be explained by a single witness account. The shift is significant. It means that Tanzanian authorities, whether publicly or internally, recognize that the initial ruling was insufficient. It means that the physical infrastructure of the resort, the technology designed to track every movement, every entry, every timestamp, is now part of the evidentiary record. And it means that Joe McCann's statement is no longer the foundation of the case. It is one piece of a puzzle that the investigation is finally being forced to assemble. The keycard logs are not the only widening lens. According to statements Tanzanian police made to ABC News, hotel staff had been alerted to the couple's dispute by other guests. Staff had responded. They had separated Joe and Ashlee, but the public record does not show what happened next. Did staff check on Ashlee after the separation? If so, when? If so, which staff member? If so, what did they observe? If not, why not? A welfare check is not optional at a property of this class when a conflict has escalated to the point of requiring intervention. It is standard protocol. It is a liability issue. It is a documented event that produces a timestamp, a name, and a record of the individual's condition. The absence of that record, or the refusal to release it, is not a neutral gap. It is a question that the investigation must answer. There is another layer to this case that has only recently entered the public conversation. Joseph McCann is not a private individual. He is a public figure in the cryptocurrency and investment space. He is the CEO and Chief Investment Officer of Asymmetric Financial, a crypto-focused investment firm backed by prominent venture capitalists Mark Andreessen and Chris Dixon. He has appeared on podcasts. He has spoken at conferences. He has built a profile around being visible, around sharing his insights on memcoin returns, on market strategies, on the future of digital assets. But the most consequential relationships of his life, the ones that shaped his personal history, stayed off that public record. In 2018, according to Fortune's April 16th reporting, Joe McCann married Shay Jackson. Jackson is a brand marketing executive whose career, traceable through her LinkedIn profile and industry coverage, includes stints at Whedon and Kennedy, Mother, Argar, New York, 5 years at Google, and, as of 2026, a global brand marketing director role at Nike's Skims division. She is approximately 10 years younger than McCann. The marriage ended before Joe's engagement to Ashlee. Shea Jackson has not made any public statement about the Zanzibar case. No reporting has connected her to what happened at the resort. She is not a suspect. She has not been contacted by Tanzanian authorities in any public record. What matters is not Jackson herself. What matters is the pattern. Joe McCann built a Wall Street profile on being visible. But the marriage, the engagement, the relationships that defined his personal life stayed invisible, low profile, unannounced. Audiences only learned about Shea Jackson because a 2024 tweet of MC Can's resurfaced in the days after Ashlee's death. In that tweet, he referred to his then spouse as a person of color. That tweet is why the internet began reconstructing his personal history the week Ashlee died. That pattern of invisibility is context. It is not accusation, but it is the framework within which the investigation must evaluate Joe McCann's statements, his decisions, and his silence. There is a third layer, a financial one. According to Fortune's April 16th reporting, Asymmetric Financial, the firm McCann founded and runs had lost approximately 78% of the value of its liquid fund during 2025. In December of that year, McCann announced the liquid fund was closing. In the months that followed, he pivoted investor attention into a new venture play, a shift that by early 2026 had not panned out in the way MC Can's public communications had suggested it would. Founders who had taken venture investments from Asymmetric's venture arm told Fortune that some of MC Can's equity stakes had been transferred or restructured during that window. None of that is evidence of a crime. None of that proves anything about what happened in Zanzibar, but it is context. The man on the safari, the man who proposed in front of a lion at Seville Wildlife Lodge, was also a man whose professional standing had been collapsing for 12 months, and whose recovery narrative depended on a pivot that had not yet produced results. That context is relevant to how police evaluate statements. It is relevant to how an audience evaluates silence. It is relevant to the question of what pressures Joe McCann was carrying into Tanzania when he got down on one knee. And then there is the medical record. The hospital that examined Ashlee Robinson's body documented a mark on her neck. The hospital could not identify that mark. A second hospital record, according to reporting, listed cerebral hypoxia, strangulation, suffocation. That document is the document Tanzania is still not releasing. If Tanzanian police ruled suicide, and if the hospital documented a mark it could not explain, and if that mark is consistent with strangulation or suffocation, then the ruling and the medical evidence are not aligned. They are in tension, and that tension is the reason the family has refused to accept the official story. Joseph McCann has not been charged. He has not been named a suspect. Tanzanian authorities have described him as a witness, but they have retained his passport. He is free to leave the country, but he has not left. That is not the status of a man who has been cleared. That is the status of a man whose account is still under review. The autopsy has not been released. The keycard forensics have not been made public. The resort's camera footage has not been disclosed. The welfare check logs, if they exist, have not been shared with the family. The family has not been fully briefed on the findings. And Joe McCann, despite multiple media requests, has not made a public statement. This case is not closed. It is widening. The new suspect, if that phrase has any meaning in this context, is not a new person. The new suspect is the investigation itself finally being forced to look at the scene instead of at a single statement. The new suspect is the keycard server. The new suspect is the welfare check log that may or may not exist. The new suspect is the radio traffic from resort security on the night of April 8th. The new suspect is the man who was moved across the property and has not gone home. Ashlee Robinson's family has asked three things: transparency, a full investigation, and accountability. They have not accused Joe McCann of murder. They have not launched a conspiracy theory. They have simply said, We do not believe the official story, and we will not stop asking questions until the evidence speaks for itself. That is where this case stands. A ruling issued too early, a family that refuses to accept it, evidence that suggests the investigation is only now beginning to follow the right leads, and a set of unanswered questions that will not go away until someone in authority decides that transparency matters more than convenience. This is part one, the foundation, the timeline, the contradictions, the secrets that have started to surface. But this story is not over. The autopsy has not dropped. The passport has not been returned. The footage has not been released. And the family has not stopped fighting. The autopsy has not been released. The passport has not been returned. The surveillance footage has not been disclosed. And the family of Ashlee Robinson has not stopped asking why. This is part two of the Ashlee Robinson case. The case of a woman who died in Zanzibar 3 days after her fiancé proposed. The case Tanzanian police ruled a suicide within days. The case her family has refused to accept from the moment they heard the official story. And the case that is now pulling apart at the seams because the evidence does not match the ruling. Part 1 established the timeline. The argument on April 8th. The separation. The 11-hour silence before Ashlee's mother was notified. The hospital documentation of a mark on Ashlee's neck that medical staff could not identify. And the shift in the investigation from a closed suicide case to an active forensic review, pulling keycard logs and questioning the only man who was on the property when she died. Part 2 is about what happened next, the secrets that emerged in the days after the ruling, the gap between what Tanzanian authorities are saying and what they are doing, and the single document that will either confirm the official story or blow it apart. The autopsy report. The report Tanzanian officials said would be complete by April 15th. The report the family has still not seen. Before we go further, this case is not over. The investigation is active. The evidence is still being reviewed, and the public pressure to release that evidence is the only thing keeping this story from disappearing into the bureaucratic silence that buries cases like this every day. If you want to stay with this story, if you want to be here when the autopsy drops, when the next document surfaces, when the next institutional failure is exposed, stay with revealing untold crimes. Like this video so the algorithm keeps it visible. Subscribe so you're here when part 3 arrives. Because what you're about to hear is not speculation. It is documentation, and it is building toward a conclusion that Tanzanian authorities are not yet willing to state out loud. The first secret that emerged after the ruling was not glamorous. It was a phone call that never happened. On April 9th, Joe McCann called Yolanda Denise Andres, Ashlee's mother. He told her that Ashlee had done something to herself. He told her Ashlee was stable. When Yolanda asked when the incident had occurred, Joe told her it had happened 11 hours earlier. 11 hours. A woman in critical condition at a Zanzibar hospital. Her mother in New Jersey. And between the moment hospital staff logged Ashlee's arrival and the moment her mother heard her daughter was dying, almost half a day passed without a word. The stated reason for that delay has never been offered, not in any public interview, not in any statement to Tanzanian authorities, not in any explanation that makes the timeline make sense. That is the first secret, the secret of what Joe McCann did not say in the window when saying it would have mattered most. But it is not the only secret that surfaced in the days after the ruling. The second secret is older. It is a marriage. In 2018, according to Fortune's April 16th reporting, Joe McCann married Shay Jackson. Jackson is a brand marketing executive whose career, documented through her LinkedIn profile and industry coverage, includes stints at Veeden and Kennedy, Mother, R/GA New York, 5 years at Google, and as of 2026, a global brand marketing director role at Nike's Skims division. She is approximately 10 years younger than Mac Cann. The marriage ended before his engagement to Ashlee. Shay Jackson has not made any public statement about the Zanzibar case. No reporting has connected her to what happened at the resort. She is not a suspect. She has not been contacted by Tanzanian authorities in any public record. What matters here is not Jackson herself. What matters is the pattern. Joe Mac Cann built a Wall Street profile on being visible. Podcasts, conference stages, industry interviews about meme coin returns and investment strategy. The version of himself he sold to investors and to the public was designed to be seen, but the most consequential relationships of his personal life stayed off that record. The marriage, the engagement, low visibility, unannounced. Audiences only learned about Shay Jackson because a 2024 tweet of MC Cann's resurfaced in the week Ashlee died. In that tweet, he referred to his then-spouse as a person of color. That tweet is why the internet began reconstructing his personal history the week Ashlee's body was found. That pattern of invisibility is not evidence of a crime, but it is the framework within which investigators must evaluate Joe Mac Cann's statements, his decisions, and his silences. The third secret is financial. According to Fortune's April 16th reporting, Asymmetric Financial, the crypto-focused investment firm Mac Cann founded and runs as CEO and Chief Investment Officer, had lost approximately 78% of the value of its liquid fund during 2025. In December of that year, Mac Cann announced the liquid fund was closing. In the months that followed, he pivoted investor attention into a new venture play, a shift that by early 2026 had not produced the results MC Cann's public communications had suggested it would. Founders who had taken venture investments from Asymmetric's venture arm told Fortune that some of MC Cann's equity stakes had been transferred or restructured during that period. None of that is evidence of a crime. None of that proves anything about what happened in a villa at Zuri Zanzibar Resort. But it is context. The man on the safari, the man who proposed in front of a lion at Seville Wildlife Lodge, the man who appeared in engagement photos that Ashlee posted with joy. That man was also carrying 12 months of professional collapse and a recovery narrative that depended on a pivot that had not yet landed. That context is relevant to how investigators evaluate witness statements. It is relevant to how an audience evaluates credibility. And it is relevant to understanding what pressures Joe Mac Cann was managing when he got down on one knee in Tanzania. The fourth secret runs in the opposite direction. It is the secret of Ashlee's trajectory, because the contrast that matters in this case is not subtle. Ashlee Robinson, under the name Ashlee Jenae, was not a stalled career. She was not a woman whose platform had plateaued. She was ascending. Over 100,000 Instagram followers, growing TikTok presence, a content brand she described as soft life divest that resonated specifically with black women who saw her as a working model for opting out of grind culture and into intentional living. That brand was not performative. It was the thesis of her public voice. Years of content, years of writing and photographing and curating experiences that demonstrated what it looked like to choose yourself on purpose, to prioritize rest, to prioritize travel, to prioritize joy over productivity. Her audience did not just follow her. They saw themselves reflected in her choices. A woman who had spent years building a life on her own terms and documenting that process for others who wanted the same. The ruling of suicide by Tanzanian police is not issued against a blank slate. It is issued against that brand, against that thesis, against the identity Ashlee had built in public over years, which means the ruling has to explain not just a death, but a reversal. A woman who celebrated her 31st birthday at Seville Wildlife Lodge, who photographed herself feeding a giraffe, who captioned that image, Chapter 31, "And I'm exactly where I need to be." And then, 72 hours later, according to the official record, took her own life in a closet. That is the narrative Tanzanian police are requiring the public to accept. A narrative that does not account for the timeline. That does not account for the phone call Ashlee had with her sister the day before she died. A call her sister Alyssa Andres described to NBC News as completely normal. A conversation about Ashlee's plans when she returned to the United States. Alyssa's exact words on camera. She was so ready to take the next steps with who she thought was the love of her life. She was so happy. A sister's testimony is not a forensic finding, but it is a data point. A woman discussing future plans, expressing happiness, celebrating her engagement, and then, with no warning and no note, ending her own life. That reversal is what the suicide ruling requires the world to believe. The fifth secret is the one Ashlee's own community has been trying to surface. Savannah Britt, a named PR specialist and friend of Ashlee's, posted publicly on Twitter on April 12th, calling for justice. Britt stated in her own words that anyone who knew Ashlee knew she would never commit suicide. She said that people in Ashlee's Instagram comments had, before the trip, warned her about MC Can, had expressed concern for her safety in the relationship. That is a documented public statement from a named source. Britt has not published a list of the commenters. The comments themselves have not been independently aggregated in mainstream reporting. No named third party with direct knowledge has emerged publicly. No documented threat has been reported. The distinction matters because some headlines have framed Britt's description as evidence of a murder plot. Britt's actual words describe fan warnings, a pattern of concern from Ashlee's own followers expressed before she died, concern that has since taken on weight because of what happened. That is the fifth secret, the secret Ashlee's audience have been trying to tell her, and the secret the official account of her death refuses to engage with. If you have followed a case like this before, if you have watched institutional silence swallow evidence, if you have seen families fight for transparency while officials stall, hit the like button, not because it flatters an algorithm, because every click on a case like this keeps it visible. The moment this story drops below the algorithm's threshold, the pressure on officials drops with it. That is the system. That is why engagement matters. The new secrets in this case are not one secret. They are 5, an 11-hour silence, a marriage kept off the public record, a fund collapse in the 12 months before the engagement, a brand trajectory that does not match the ruling, and a community of followers who tried to warn her, whose warnings are not in any police file. Those are not evidence of a crime. They are evidence of a case that is not yet being investigated at the depth it requires. Which brings us to the next question. Are the police lying? The title of this episode carries a question mark on purpose. This section is not calling Tanzanian police criminals. What this analysis does is read the words Tanzanian authorities have used, read the actions Tanzanian authorities have taken, and show you the gap between them. Here are the words Tanzanian authorities have used on the public record. Witness, not a suspect. No basis for criminal charges. Misunderstanding. Romantic conflict. Here are the actions Tanzanian authorities have taken on the public record. MC Can's passport withheld since April 14th. Mac Can continues to be questioned. Deputy Commissioner Zuberi Shambela refused to comment to reporters, citing ongoing investigation. Keycard logs reportedly under review. Autopsy complete. Results not released. Read those two lists side by side. Every word in the first column is the language of a closed case with a cooperating witness. Every action in the second column is the conduct of an active investigation with a restrained subject. Both cannot be true at the same time. That is not an accusation of police lying in the criminal sense. It is a description of how the word witness in this investigation is doing work the word is not built to do. In most legal systems, including Tanzania, a witness is a person who is free. They cooperate on a voluntary basis. Their travel documents belong to them. Their movement belongs to them. The state does not retain them. The moment the state does retain them, the state's own label for them must shift. Material witness, person of interest, suspect. Different systems use different escalation terms. But every functioning system has one. What a state does not do in any functional legal system is hold a person's travel document while continuing to call that person a witness. That is a linguistic maneuver, not a legal status. The second gap between language and conduct is about the ruling itself. On April 14th, reporting by ABC affiliate WPVI made public a detail the official Tanzanian statements had not disclosed. The hospital medical record, obtained in Ashlee Robinson's case, noted in writing an unidentified mark around her neck. The same record stated on a separate line that according to her husband, he found she hung herself on the door. A second hospital she was reportedly taken to listed her immediate cause of death as cerebral hypoxia by strangulation and suffocation. Read that language clinically. Husband in a hospital record is a statement a medical team made based on what a person at the scene told them. Ashlee and Joe were not legally married. They were engaged. The word husband in that record is evidence of what Joe McCann told medical staff that night. And the medical team documented a mark that did not match the story he gave them. The clinical significance of a hospital labeling a mark unidentified is worth slowing down for. Forensic pathologists see ligature marks from self-suspension often enough to recognize the pattern. Self-suspension produces an angled mark, an inverted V shape. The highest point of the mark is above and behind the ear, on the side. The weight pulls away from the knot. That shape is predictable. Hospitals document it clearly when they see it. When a hospital documents a mark as unidentified, it means the pattern on the neck did not read as recognizable self-suspension. That is not on its own a definitive claim of homicide. It is a clinical hedge, a refusal by the examining team to rubber stamp a scene description they could not reconcile with the evidence on the body. So the language of Tanzanian police was suicide. The language of the hospital was unidentified. Those two words describe the same woman, and they do not align. The third gap between language and conduct runs through Ashlee's father on camera. Harry Robinson told WPVI in a quote that aired that sometimes Joe went back to the room with security, and that is how they found her. That sentence places the discovery of Ashlee's body in a two-person moment. Joe and resort security, not a solo discovery by a returning fiancé. The hospital record's framing of her husband finding her hung on the door suggests a solo discovery account. Those two accounts cannot both be fully true in the same shape. Either the solo version Joe told the hospital is simplified, or the security present version Harry heard from the resort is simplified. Either way, two different institutions in Tanzania, a hospital and a hotel security team, came away from the same night with different pictures of how Ashlee's body was found. A rigorous investigation would be reconciling those two pictures. The public record does not show that reconciliation. The fourth gap is the keycard logs themselves. A keycard system at a property like Zuri, Zanzibar, is the closest thing a physical world investigation has to a black box. Every entry and exit at a villa door pings a server with a timestamp and a card ID. The server logs are not a copy of a statement. They are not an account. They are a record. In the hours between April 8th and April 10th, those logs contain the answer to who was in Ashlee's villa and when. The same is true of surveillance cameras. Zuri Zanzibar's common area walkways, its restaurant areas, its staff corridors carry camera coverage as standard for a resort at its price point. Harry Robinson said it on camera to reporters. There are cameras everywhere at a resort, and the timeline will match. A Tanzanian investigation that has been in possession of that footage for more than 2 weeks and has not publicly described it is an investigation that is either keeping the footage in reserve for a prosecution that has not yet been announced, or is describing the footage privately in a way that contradicts the public ruling. Both possibilities are incompatible with a closed suicide case. Neither possibility has been explained. Reporting in the week after the ruling suggests investigators have been pulling the keycard logs. That is not a lie. It is the opposite of a lie. It is the quiet admission that the ruling was premature, because a suicide case does not need the server logs. A suicide case closes with a ligature pattern, an absence of defensive injuries, a toxicology result, and a coroner's signature. A case that is pulling keycard data is a case that is building a scene reconstruction. Scene reconstructions belong to investigations, not to rulings. That is the cleanest answer to the question. Tanzanian police are not lying in the criminal sense. Tanzanian police are using the language of a closed case while doing the work of an open one. The question mark in the title is there on purpose. You are being asked to watch the gap and to draw your own conclusion about whether the label on this case matches its conduct. If you have made it to this point, you are watching the same gap Ashlee's family has been watching for weeks. Drop a comment below with the one question you want a Tanzanian investigator to answer on the record. Tag someone who has been following this case. Turn on notifications, because the autopsy is the next pivot. And when it lands, you want to see it inside the frame this channel has already built, not inside a 2-minute aggregator headline. The question of police honesty has a narrow and sharp answer. They are using words that do not match what they are doing, which is what language always does when the truth is not yet ready to be stated out loud, which leaves one final question. And it is not in the title of this episode. It is the question the title's 3 questions all converge on. What does the autopsy have to explain? The autopsy report, stated by Tanzanian authorities to be complete by April 15th, remains publicly undisclosed, per the family's public statements. It has not been disclosed to them either. That silence is a data point. A report that confirms the suicide ruling cleanly. A ligature mark matching self-suspension. A clean toxicology screen. No defensive injuries is a report most jurisdictions would want to release. It closes the speculation. It ends the online pressure. It lets officials point to a document and walk away. A report that does not confirm the suicide ruling cleanly is a report most jurisdictions would hold. The delay alone does not tell you which one this is. The delay tells you the outcome is not simple. The autopsy has to explain 3 things the public record is already demanding. It has to explain the mark the first hospital could not identify. If the autopsy describes a classic self-suspension ligature pattern, that finding has to be reconciled with the WPVI reported hospital note that did not match that pattern the first time around. 2 different pieces of paper, 1 country. The autopsy will either line up with the hospital note or contradict it. It cannot do both. It has to explain the 11-hour window. Toxicology. If it shows substances affecting consciousness or capacity, anything that would have reduced Ashlee's ability to make decisions for herself, changes the meaning of what Joe McCann told the hospital about self-suspension. A person who is not fully conscious cannot suspend themselves from a door. It has to explain the pattern of injuries beyond the neck. Defensive wounds on the forearms, the hands, or the face would contradict the suicide framing directly. No defensive wounds would narrow the case, but would still leave the unidentified mark and the 11-hour silence open. Whichever of those 3 the autopsy addresses, the report does not operate in a vacuum. The hospital note is on the public record. The unidentified mark line is now the document every other Tanzanian statement has to read past, which is why the family's access to the autopsy is not a procedural question. It is the whole question. The second pathway of what happens next runs through a jurisdictional wall. The U.S. State Department has publicly confirmed it is monitoring the case. Confirmed, not intervening. American citizens who die abroad are not automatically under U.S. criminal jurisdiction. Tanzania leads its own investigations. The FBI's legal attaché program, embedded at U.S. embassies, can assist if host country authorities formally request it. But no public record of such a request exists. The practical meaning of that gap is simple. Unless Tanzania invites American federal investigators in, The American family has no direct line into the forensic evidence of their own daughter's death, which is why Harry Robinson's April 14th trip to Washington, D.C., reported by TMZ and CBS Philadelphia, was not a grief itinerary. It was an escalation. A father going to a federal doorstep to ask physically whether the diplomatic channel could be pushed any faster than it is being pushed. That answer, as of now, has not produced a public update. A realistic Tanzania trip for the family, if it happens, involves a sequence most people have not seen laid out. First, the U.S. consular team in Dar es Salaam, the Tanzanian commercial capital on the mainland. Then a flight, or ferry, crossing to Unguja Island. Meetings with North Unguja Police, where Commander Benedict Mapujira and Deputy Commissioner Zuberi Chambella have made the public statements in this case. A supervised review of any surveillance footage the resort and the police agree to show. A possible meeting with Zuri Zanzibar management on property. And critically, the retention of Tanzanian counsel, because any legal motion to compel evidence or to challenge the investigation's posture has to be filed under Tanzanian law, not American. The family's GoFundMe, which CBS Philadelphia reported had crossed $42,000 by mid-April, is what funds that sequence. The math of that fund is the math of whether a family in New Jersey can force the transparency of a foreign investigation through the physical presence of parents 9 time zones from home. A GoFundMe is not a legal instrument, but in a case with no federal prosecution and no domestic jurisdiction, it is the instrument the family had. The community that kept this case visible was not the mainstream press initially. It was open-source commenters, named friends like Savannah Britt, cultural voices like Cardi B, who publicly rejected the suicide framing, and writers like Dr. Stacey Patton, whose News One op-ed placed Ashlee's case inside the wider pattern of how black women's cases get covered and how often they do not. Those voices did something concrete. They kept the story in the algorithm, which is not a literary achievement. It is the reason the autopsy has not yet been released into a case that had already stopped being a news story. There is one detail worth flagging that most versions of this case have missed. Coin 6, the NBC affiliate in Portland, Oregon, ran a local angle package confirming through public records that both Ashlee Robinson and Joe McCann had Portland addresses associated with them, a residency angle that sits alongside Ashlee's widely reported Miami base and her South Jersey upbringing. It is not an accusation. It is a data point about the couple's actual geography, a map of their recent life that has not been publicly reconstructed in any Tanzanian statement. What the autopsy has to explain, in the end, is 3 things: an unidentified mark, an 11-hour silence, and a scene that was never independently witnessed by anyone but the man the state is still holding in the country. 4 questions, 1 case. Who is the new suspect? Not a person. The keycard server, the welfare check log, the radio traffic on the night of April 8th. The body of evidence Tanzanian police can no longer rely on one man's statement to replace. What are the new secrets? An 11-hour phone call that did not happen. A marriage the podcast circuit did not know about. A fund collapse in the 12 months before the engagement. A brand trajectory that does not match its ruling. A community of followers whose warnings are not in any file. Are the police lying? They are using the language of a witness while doing the conduct of a suspect case. That is not a lie in the criminal sense. It is a truth that is not ready to be stated out loud. What does the autopsy have to explain? The mark the hospital could not identify. The silence no one has accounted for. The woman who wrote chapter 31, and I'm exactly where I need to be, and did not write anything after. The report is coming. When it does, the frame you just watched is the frame to read it against. Stay with revealing untold crimes. Subscribe to this channel. Turn on notifications. Because when that autopsy lands, when the keycard data surfaces, when the next institutional crack appears, you want to be here, not reading a headline, reading the evidence. That is the episode you want to be here for, and it is coming.